Kinds of teaching, a theoretical perspective. This is a quick look at some of the educational theory that is the foundation for some of the things that we see when we observe in schools. First a review, and then we'll get to something a little bit more depth. We know about behaviorism. We know that the most well-known proponent of behaviorism is B.F. Skinner. He did a lot of his work with animals, a lot with pigeons, and he formulated his theories about learning based on what he saw with how animals behaved. So he said that learning isn't really something that goes on in our heads, but learning is behaviors that change. And so when he worked with the pigeons to make their behaviors changed, he broke the learning down into small little pieces. So in one experiment, he taught pigeons how to make a little circle in their cage, and then they got food as a reward. So very gradually he taught pigeons to circle partway around, and then circle a little farther around and a little farther around, and eventually they made the whole circle around. So when we see learning broken down into tiny little pieces, that may go back to ideas from behaviorism. We also see that learning or change in behavior is dictated by the environment through the rewards and the punishments that the environment provides for us. And therefore, we don't really have any free will, we don't make any decisions, but everything that we do, the learning that we do, the behaviors that we change, the decisions that we feel like we make, really are determined by the environment. A newer theory that you may have heard some phrases from, or you may know about, it's called teaching with the brain in mind. Some people call it brain-based teaching, brain-based learning. And the whole idea of that is looking at research from neuroscience and applying it to educational settings. So it has some pluses and it has some minuses. It has some people who argue for it, and it has some detractors too. So on the plus side, it provides scientific evidence for good teaching practice. So now, we may know that it's good, we may have known for a long time that it's good to present material using, with a variety of sensory input. But now we know that it's good because of what happens in the brain with sensory perception. So that might make teaching more scientific, because we can say, oh, we do this because of, and then say some science words about brain development and brain activity, which also may raise the status of teaching. There's some specific applications that have come through neurological research, neuroscience. One is called Fast Forward, and it's a computer application where students who have trouble processing language, the sounds of language, the words of language, the sentences of language, work on a computer program for a long period of time, and it retrains their brain to process language more efficiently. There's another one called Play Attention, where students put on a helmet, it looks like a bike helmet, and they actually manipulate the game with their thinking. And it's designed to help students learn what it feels like and to sustain their attention better, especially for students who have attention deficit. So for the detractors, people who say that this is overrated, I call this the duh factor. People say, of course, learning happens in the brain. Where else does it happen? In the elbow? Some people say it's really simplistic. I think that's the main criticism of it, is that neuroscience, and we know that the brain is really complex, and sometimes it comes down to us with really simplistic things such as, oh, I'm right-brained, and so I don't think of things that way, or, oh, I'm left-brained, so I do really well with language and math. The brain is much more complicated besides language on the left side, visual on the right side. You may hear teachers say, oh, for those of you who are visual learners, I do this. Or for those of you who are audio learners or kinesthetic learners, we do this. But all of us are all kinds of those learners. We may have specific strengths, but they're more specific than just audio or visual or kinesthetic. So what we hear sometimes in teachers say, or the teaching profession, what comes down to us is a real kind of dumbed down version of this neuroscience. Some people say it doesn't really provide help for new teaching strategies. This doesn't really help us get anywhere. It just kind of gives us scientific evidence for the things that we already know are good. The main focus of what I'll talk about today is constructivism. And so that gets its name from the idea that knowledge or understanding of knowledge is actively constructed by the learner, that it's not something that is just passively put into the learner's mind or conditioned by external forces. So one of the first people who talked about constructivism is Jean Piaget, who was a Swiss theorist. He's famous for, you may know him already, for his stages of cognitive development that children and young adults and older adults go through as they develop. He talked a lot about people interacting with their environment. So a learner takes some of the environment, handles the Play-Doh, pours the water, digs in the sand, tries to make an argument, manipulates things, see how things work, and then the environment changes because of what the learner did, and then the environment affects the learner. So it's a cycle of the learner affecting the environment and learning from how the environment changes. He also developed something that is known as schema theory, and the idea of that is that our knowledge can very well be represented by little points or nodes of information that are connected in various ways. So some connections are really strong, some connections are not as strong. So when I say convertible, other things come into your mind, and so those are the things where the connections are very, very strong. If I say convertible, you probably wouldn't say center of the earth, because that's a weak connection, or maybe even a non-existent connection. Another theorist who talked about constructivism is Lev Vygotsky, a Russian Soviet education theorist. He didn't talk so much about individuals with their world, but people together, constructing knowledge together. So his theory is often known as social constructivism. A really important part of social construction is called scaffolding. It's what people do to help other people learn. So by scaffolding a research project, I might break it down into parts, I may give you some ideas, I may point you some directions, I may read some rough drafts and give you some ideas. So by me doing that, that allows you to do a research project which maybe you wouldn't be able to do as well without my help. So that's scaffolding, what adults do or what teachers do to help students learn to do something. He also has an idea called the zone of proximal development, which talks about the range of things that a learner can do, whether the learner can do something independently or not at all, or with someone's help. So if something is in my zone of proximal development, that means that I can do something with help that I couldn't do by myself. And so once I can do that and I get that help, then I won't need the help later on. I can do it by myself, and then I can do something else though with somebody's help. So that's the zone of proximal development, and very few people know this, but there's a ride at Disneyland that's the Lev Vygotsky ride. So next time you go on Splash Mountain, think of this: Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay, my oh my, what a wonderful way to scaffold your learning every day. Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay.